The police sirens wailed like a banshee in the night, tearing through the quiet of Maplewood Lane. Ethan Carter, barely 19, stood frozen on his own front lawn, his heart pounding as two officers dragged his belongings. Clothes, books, a cracked phone, into the street. "You're not welcome here anymore, kid." His stepfather's voice growled from the porch, a venomous echo of the rejection Ethan had feared his whole life. It was 8:47 p.m. in Willow Creek, a sleepy Oregon town where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were currency. Ethan had come out to his family that morning, his voice trembling as he admitted he was gay. His mother's silence had been deafening, but his stepfather, Dale, erupted in rage. By evening, Dale had called the police, claiming Ethan was a disruptive presence. The officers, faces blank as stone, cited a vague trespassing violation. Ethan's pleas were drowned out by the slam of the front door, locking him out of the only home he'd ever known. He stood there, shivering in the September chill, his backpack slung over one shoulder. The streetlights cast long shadows, and the neighbors' curtains twitched, silent witnesses to his humiliation. Ethan's world had collapsed in hours, and the weight of it pressed against his chest. He was alone, or so he thought, until a voice broke through the haze. "Hey, you okay?" The question came from a young man in a cadet uniform, leaning against a patrol car parked across the street. His name tag read Liam Harper. He was maybe 22, with warm brown eyes and a cautious smile that didn't match the stiffness of his starched uniform. Ethan wiped his face, embarrassed by the tears streaking his cheeks. "Do I look okay?" he snapped, his voice raw. Liam didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. "I saw what happened. That wasn't right." His tone was steady, not pitying, and it caught Ethan off guard. Most people in Willow Creek would have looked the other way. Small towns weren't kind to troublemakers like him. But Liam's gaze held something different. Not judgment, but concern. "I don't need your charity," Ethan muttered, turning to walk away. He had nowhere to go, but pride kept him moving. The street stretched out, empty and cold, and the weight of his backpack felt like the only thing tethering him to the earth. Behind him, Liam called out, "You don't have to do this alone. I've got a place you can crash for the night." Ethan stopped. He didn't turn around, not yet. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, not after today. But the sincerity in Liam's voice tugged at something deep inside him, a flicker of hope he hadn't realized he still had. "Why would you help me?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Liam hesitated, then said, "Because I know what it's like to feel like you don't belong." There was a weight to his words, a story untold. Ethan turned to face him, searching Liam's eyes for a catch. There wasn't one. Against his better judgment, Ethan nodded. "Just one night," he said, more to himself than to Liam. Liam's apartment was a small, cluttered space above a hardware store on Main Street. The walls were bare except for a framed photo of a younger Liam with an older woman. His grandmother, Ethan guessed. A worn couch doubled as a guest bed, and the kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and burnt toast. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and to Ethan it felt like a lifeline. They sat at a rickety table, sharing a pizza Liam had ordered. Ethan picked at the crust, his appetite gone. "You don't have to do this," he said again, staring at the table. "I'm nobody to you." Liam leaned back, his chair creaking. "Nobody's nobody, Ethan. Besides, I'm not exactly the poster boy for fitting in either." He paused, then added, "I'm not out to anyone at the station. Not yet. But I get it, hiding who you are. It's exhausting." Ethan's eyes widened. Liam was gay? The revelation hit like a spark, igniting a mix of relief and curiosity. He hadn't expected to find an ally in a police cadet, of all people. "Why tell me that?" Ethan asked, his guard still up. "Because you deserve to know you're not alone," Liam said simply. "And because I couldn't just walk away tonight." The words hung between them, heavy with possibility. Ethan didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. For the first time that day, the silence didn't feel suffocating. They talked late into the night, about Willow Creek, about the pressure to conform, about the dreams they both kept hidden. Liam wanted to be a detective someday, to make things right in a system that often failed people like Ethan. Ethan, in turn, admitted he'd always wanted to write, to tell stories that mattered. By midnight, Ethan was curled up on the couch, a borrowed blanket draped over him. Sleep didn't come easily. His mind replayed the police, his stepfather's sneer, his mother's silence. But Liam's quiet presence in the next room was a small anchor, keeping him from drifting into despair. For one night, at least, he wasn't alone. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the apartment's single window, painting the room in soft gold. Ethan woke to the sound of Liam humming in the kitchen, flipping pancakes with surprising skill. "You're up?" Liam said, glancing over with a grin. "Hope you like breakfast." Ethan sat at the table, still groggy. "You didn't have to." Yeah, I know," Liam interrupted, sliding a plate toward him. "Eat. We've got a long day ahead." "A long day," Ethan echoed, confused. Liam's expression turned serious. "I'm not letting you go back to that house, not after what they did. We'll figure something out. Together." Ethan stared at the pancakes, his throat tight. He didn't know what together meant. Not yet. But for the first time in years, he felt seen not as a problem or a secret, but as a person. And in that moment, Willow Creek didn't feel quite so small. The pancakes were warm, but Ethan barely tasted them. His mind was a storm of questions. Where would he go? What would he do? Liam's offer to help was generous. But Ethan had learned early that kindness often came with strings. Willow Creek wasn't a place where people helped without expecting something in return. Liam sat across from him, sipping coffee, his cadet uniform swapped for a plain t-shirt and jeans. He looked less like a cop now, more like someone Ethan might have met at a coffee shop or a library. "So," Liam began, breaking the silence, "you got any family you can stay with?" "Friends." Ethan shook his head. "My mom's all I had, and he trailed off, the memory of her silence cutting deeper than his stepfather's words. His friends from high school had drifted away after graduation, their lives moving on while Ethan stayed stuck, working odd jobs at the local diner to save for a future he couldn't quite picture. "I'm on my own." Liam frowned, setting his mug down. "Not anymore." His tone was firm, like he'd already made up his mind. "You can stay here until we figure out a plan. I've got a shift at the station later, but I'll ask around, see if there's any resources, shelters, programs, anything." Ethan's stomach twisted. "I don't need a shelter," he said, sharper than he meant. The idea of being shuffled into some system labeled as a case made his skin crawl. He'd rather sleep on the street than be reduced to a number. Liam raised his hands, placating. "Okay, no shelters, but we need to get you on your feet. You said you like to write. Any chance you could freelance? Or maybe look for a job somewhere else in town?" Ethan hesitated. Writing was his escape, not a career, at least not yet. He'd filled notebooks with stories since he was a kid, but showing them to anyone felt like exposing a raw nerve. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've never tried to sell my stuff." Liam leaned forward, his eyes bright with an idea. "There's a community center a few blocks away. They've got a bulletin board for local gigs, writing, editing, even tutoring. I could take you there after my shift. Might be a start. Ethan nodded, more to keep Liam from pressing than out of conviction. The thought of starting over was overwhelming, but Liam's enthusiasm was hard to dismiss. There was something about him, his quiet confidence, his refusal to let Ethan spiral, that made the impossible seem just out of reach instead of unreachable. That afternoon, Liam headed to the police station, leaving Ethan alone in the apartment. The quiet was unnerving. Ethan wandered the small space, noticing details he'd missed the night before. A stack of mystery novels on a shelf, a half-finished crossword on the coffee table, a faded pride flag pinned to the wall behind a lamp, almost hidden. It was a small thing, but it made Ethan's chest ache with a mix of relief and longing. Liam was like him, but braver than Ethan felt right now. He pulled out his notebook from his backpack, the one thing he'd managed to save from the chaos. The pages were filled with half-finished stories, poems, and fragments of a novel he'd been too scared to finish. He flipped to a blank page and started writing, the words pouring out like a dam breaking. It wasn't a story this time, just raw, messy thoughts about the past 24 hours. The betrayal, the fear, the stranger who'd offered him a couch and a chance. By the time Liam returned, Ethan had filled 3 pages. "You're deep in it?" Liam said, nodding at the notebook as he kicked off his boots. "What's that?" "Nothing," Ethan said quickly, closing the book. "Just processing." Liam didn't push. Instead, he pulled a flyer from his pocket and slid it across the table. "Found this at the station. The community center's hosting a writing workshop tomorrow. Thought you might want to check it out." Ethan stared at the flyer, a mix of nerves and curiosity stirring. "You're really invested in this, huh?" Liam shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "Someone's gotta be. Besides, I like a project." Ethan laughed, the sound surprising him. It was the first time he'd laughed since yesterday morning, before his world turned upside down. For a moment, the weight lifted, and he saw Liam not just as a rescuer, but as someone real, someone who might actually care. The next day, they walked to the community center together, the autumn leaves crunching under their feet. Willow Creek was waking up, its streets lined with mom-and-pop shops and old brick buildings. The center was a low, sprawling building with a mural of kids playing painted on one wall. Inside, it buzzed with activity. Kids running through the halls, seniors playing chess, a group of teens practicing a dance routine. The writing workshop was in a small room at the back, led by a woman named Marissa, a retired journalist with sharp eyes and a warm voice. She welcomed Ethan like he belonged, no questions asked. The group was small, 6 people, ranging from a high schooler to a grandmother, but their stories were raw and real. Ethan read a short piece he'd written that morning, his voice shaky but growing steadier with each word. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment before Marissa said, "You've got a gift, Ethan. Keep going." He felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in years. Pride. Liam, who'd waited outside, caught his eye as he left the room. "Told you," Liam said, grinning. "You're good." Ethan ducked his head, embarrassed but pleased. For the first time, he let himself imagine a future where he wasn't just surviving, but creating, telling stories that could change things the way Liam was trying to change things for him. But reality wasn't far behind. That evening, as they walked back to the apartment, Ethan spotted a familiar car parked across the street, his stepfather's old pickup. Dale was leaning against it, arms crossed, his face a storm cloud. Ethan froze, his heart racing. Liam stepped in front of him, his posture tense but calm. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. Dale's voice was low, menacing. "You think you can just run off and play victim, Ethan? This isn't over." Ethan's breath caught in his throat as Dale took a step forward, his boots scuffing the pavement. The streetlights cast harsh shadows across his stepfather's face, making him look more like a predator than a man. "You're coming home, Ethan," Dale said, his voice a low growl. "Your mother's worried sick." "Worried?" Ethan's voice cracked, anger surging past his fear. "She didn't say a word when you threw me out. Don't act like this is about her." Liam's hand rested lightly on Ethan's arm, a silent signal to stay calm. "Sir," Liam said, his tone professional but firm, "Ethan's not going anywhere he doesn't want to. If you've got a problem, we can talk it out, but not like this." Dale's eyes narrowed, sizing Liam up. "You're that cadet, aren't you? Sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." He took another step, his fists clenched. For a moment, Ethan thought Dale might swing, and his body braced for impact. But Liam didn't budge, his stance steady, like he'd faced worse than an angry man in a quiet street. "Step back," Liam said, his voice dropping an octave. It wasn't a request. Dale hesitated, then spat on the ground, muttering a curse before turning back to his truck. "This isn't over," he repeated, slamming the door and peeling away, tires screeching. Ethan's knees felt weak, but he forced himself to stand tall. "Thanks," he said, his voice barely audible. Liam turned to him, his expression softening. "You don't have to thank me. Nobody gets to bully you, not while I'm around." They walked back to the apartment in silence, the encounter with Dale hanging heavy between them. Ethan's mind raced. Dale wasn't the type to let things go. He'd always been controlling, but this felt different, more personal. Ethan wondered if his stepfather's anger was less about him being gay and more about the loss of control over him. Either way, it wasn't safe to stay in Willow Creek long-term. Inside, Liam locked the door and checked the windows, a habit from his training, Ethan guessed. "He won't come here," Liam said, reading Ethan's worry. "But if he does, I've got your back." Ethan nodded, but doubt gnawed at him. He didn't want to drag Liam into his mess. "You don't even know me," he said, sinking onto the couch. "Why are you doing this?" Liam sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I told you. I know what it's like to feel like you don't fit. My dad was like Dale in a way. He didn't kick me out, but he made it clear I wasn't what he wanted in a son. I spent years trying to be someone else to make him proud. It didn't work." He paused, his voice softer. "When I saw you on that lawn, I saw myself. I couldn't just walk away." Ethan looked at him, really looked, and saw the weight Liam carried. It wasn't just empathy, it was a shared wound. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, meaning it. "About your dad." Liam shrugged, a half-smile breaking through. "He's in the past. I'm here now, and so are you. That's what matters." The next few days settled into a fragile routine. Ethan went to the community center each morning, working on his writing and helping Marissa with the workshop. He started tutoring a few kids in English, earning enough to buy groceries and feel less like a burden. Liam worked long shifts at the station, but he always came home with stories. Funny ones about his coworkers, serious ones about cases he hoped to solve someday. At night, they'd talk over cheap takeout, their conversations weaving between dreams and fears. Ethan began to notice the way Liam's eyes lit up when he laughed, the way his hands moved when he got excited about something. It was dangerous, this feeling creeping into Ethan's chest, a warmth he hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. He pushed it down, telling himself Liam was just a friend, a good person doing a good thing. But late at night, when the apartment was quiet, Ethan couldn't ignore the pull. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching a bad sci-fi movie, Ethan worked up the courage to ask, "What happens when you finish your training? You gonna stay in Willow Creek?" Liam stretched, his arm brushing Ethan's. "Maybe," Depends on where I get assigned. I want to work somewhere I can make a difference, you know? Not just writing tickets or breaking up bar fights. He glanced at Ethan. What about you? You gonna stay? Ethan stared at the TV, the question heavier than it sounded. I don't know. I never thought I'd have to decide. I always thought I'd be stuck here forever. He hesitated, then added, but now I'm starting to think I could be more than this place. Liam's smile was small but genuine. You already are. The words hit Ethan harder than he expected. He turned away, pretending to focus on the movie, but his heart was racing. Liam didn't push, didn't say anything else, but the air between them felt charged, like a storm waiting to break. The next morning, Ethan woke to a text from his mother. We need to talk. Meet me at the diner, 10 a.m. His stomach dropped. He hadn't heard from her since the night he was thrown out, and the thought of facing her now made his hands shake. He showed the text to Liam, who frowned but nodded. You want me to come with you? Ethan shook his head. I need to do this alone. But as he said it, he wasn't sure he meant it. The diner was a relic of Willow Creek's past, with checkered floors and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. Ethan's mother, Carol, sat in a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug. She looked older than he remembered, her eyes tired and rimmed with red. Ethan, she said as he sat down, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. He waited, expecting more, but she just stared at her coffee. Sorry for what? He asked, his voice sharper than he intended. For letting Dale kick me out? For not saying anything? Her eyes flicked up, filled with tears. I didn't know how to handle it. I still don't. But I want you to come home. Ethan's heart twisted. He wanted to believe her, to go back to the way things were. But he knew better. Home isn't a place I can trust anymore, he said, his voice steady despite the ache. Not with him there. Carol's face crumpled, but she didn't argue. They sat in silence, the weight of years between them. When Ethan left the diner, he felt both lighter and heavier, like he'd shed a piece of himself but gained something new. Resolve. Ethan walked back to Liam's apartment, the diner's fluorescent lights still burning in his mind. His mother's apology had been real, but it wasn't enough, not yet. He needed more than words to rebuild what had been broken. The streets of Willow Creek felt different now, less like a trap and more like a place he could choose to leave. Liam had given him that, even if he didn't fully understand it himself. When he got back, Liam was at the kitchen table, hunched over a laptop, his brow furrowed. Everything okay? Liam asked, looking up as Ethan dropped his keys on the counter. Ethan shrugged, not ready to unpack the conversation with his mother. It was fine. She wants me to come home, but it's not that simple. Liam nodded like he understood more than Ethan was saying. You don't have to decide anything today. You've got time. Time. It was a luxury Ethan hadn't had 48 hours ago, when he was standing on his front lawn with nowhere to go. Now, thanks to Liam, he had a roof, a couch, and a chance to think. He sat across from Liam, watching him type. What are you working on? Paperwork, Liam groaned, rubbing his eyes. Training's no joke. They've got me shadowing a detective next week, though. That's the good stuff. Real cases, not just traffic stops. Ethan leaned forward, curious. What kind of cases? Liam's face lit up, the exhaustion fading. Mostly small-time stuff, burglaries, vandalism. But there's this one case, a missing person from a few years back. Nobody talks about it much, but I keep digging through the files. Something doesn't add up. Ethan smiled, caught up in Liam's passion. You're gonna be a great detective. You've got that thing. Like you won't let go until you find the truth. Liam laughed, a little embarrassed. Hope so. What about you? You gonna keep writing? Ethan thought about the workshop, Marissa's encouragement, the kids he was tutoring. Yeah, he said, surprising himself with how certain he sounded. I think I am. That night, they went to the community center for an open mic event Marissa had organized. Ethan hadn't planned to read, but when Marissa called his name, the room's expectant eyes pulled him to the stage. He read a short story he'd written that week, about a boy who found a home in the stars after losing his own. His voice shook at first, but by the end, it was steady, the words flowing like they'd been waiting years to be heard. The applause was soft but warm, and when he stepped off the stage, Liam was there, clapping louder than anyone. You were amazing, Liam said, his grin wide. I mean it. You've got something special. Ethan's face heated, but he couldn't hide his smile. Thanks. For everything. The moment lingered, their eyes locked longer than necessary. Ethan felt that pull again, stronger now, but he pushed it down. Liam was his friend, his lifeline. He couldn't risk ruining that. The next week was a blur of small victories and quiet tensions. Ethan took on more tutoring gigs, saving every dollar he earned. He wrote every day, filling his notebook with stories that felt more like truths. Liam's shifts grew longer, but he always made time to check in, to share a meal or a laugh. Their routine felt like a fragile kind of normal, one Ethan was terrified to lose. But Willow Creek wasn't done with him. One afternoon, as Ethan left the community center, he saw Dale's truck again, parked a block away. This time, Dale wasn't alone. Two men Ethan didn't recognize stood with him, their postures aggressive. Ethan's heart raced, but he kept walking, his head down. He didn't tell Liam, not wanting to worry him, but the encounter left him uneasy. That night, Liam came home late, his face drawn. Rough day? Ethan asked, handing him a soda. Liam nodded, collapsing onto the couch. Got chewed out by my sergeant for asking too many questions about that missing person case. They want me to stick to the basics, but I can't shake the feeling there's more to it. Ethan sat beside him, their knees brushing. You'll figure it out. You're stubborn like that. Liam chuckled, but his eyes were distant. Maybe. Just feels like I'm missing something big. He turned to Ethan, his expression softening. You doing okay? You've been quiet. Ethan hesitated, the image of Dale and those men flashing in his mind. Just thinking about what's next. I can't stay here forever. Liam's face tightened, just for a second. You could, he said, then quickly added. I mean, if you wanted, there's no rush. Ethan's heart skipped. He wanted to say something, to name the feeling growing between them, but fear held him back. Instead, he nodded, letting the moment pass. The next day, Marissa offered Ethan a part-time job at the community center, helping with the writing program. It wasn't much, but it was steady, and it meant he could start saving for a place of his own. He told Liam over dinner, expecting him to be thrilled, but Liam's smile was strained. That's great, Liam said, poking at his food. Really proud of you. Ethan frowned. You don't sound happy. Liam sighed, running a hand through his hair. I am. It's just I like having you here. Feels like we're a team, you know? Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to say he felt the same, that Liam's apartment had become more than a temporary refuge. But before he could speak, Liam's phone buzzed. A text from the station. I gotta go, Liam said, grabbing his jacket. Emergency call. We'll talk later. Okay? Ethan nodded, but as the door closed, he felt a pang of unease. Something was shifting, and he wasn't sure he was ready for it. Liam didn't come home that night. Ethan stayed up, the apartment too quiet without the sound of Liam's keys jingling or his off-key humming. By 2 a.m., worry had turned to dread. He texted Liam, then called, but got no answer. The news on TV mentioned a police operation downtown, something about a drug bust gone wrong, but details were scarce. Ethan's imagination ran wild. Liam hurt, Liam in danger, Liam gone. He paced the apartment, his notebook forgotten on the table. The pride flag on the wall seemed to mock him, a reminder of the fragile hope he'd let himself feel. When the phone finally buzzed at 4 a.m., Ethan nearly dropped it in his haste to answer. Liam, I'm okay. Liam's voice came through, tired but alive. Sorry I didn't call sooner. Things got messy. I'm at the station, but I'll be home soon. Relief flooded Ethan, followed by a surge of anger. You scared the hell out of me, he said, his voice shaking. What happened? Liam hesitated. Can't talk about it now. Just stay safe. Okay? Lock the door. Ethan did as he was told, but sleep wouldn't come. When Liam finally walked in at dawn, he looked like he'd aged a decade. His uniform was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. Ethan wanted to ask 100 questions, but the exhaustion on Liam's face stopped him. Instead, he handed Liam a mug of coffee and sat beside him on the couch. It was the missing person case, Liam said after a long silence. We got a lead, but it went south. Someone got hurt. Not me, but it's bad. He rubbed his face, his hands trembling slightly. I'm supposed to let it go, but I can't. Ethan reached out, hesitating before resting a hand on Liam's shoulder. You don't have to carry it alone, he said, echoing Liam's words from that first night. You helped me. Let me help you. Liam looked at him, his eyes searching. For a moment, Ethan thought he might lean in, might close the distance between them. But Liam pulled back, standing abruptly. I need a shower, he said, his voice rough. Thanks, though. Ethan watched him go, a knot in his chest. He wanted to follow, to say something, anything, to bridge the gap. But he stayed put, the weight of unspoken words heavy between them. The next few days were tense. Liam was quieter, distracted, his mind clearly on the case. Ethan threw himself into his new job at the community center, teaching kids how to write stories and finding his own voice in the process. But the shadow of Dale lingered. Ethan hadn't seen him since that day on the street, but he felt watched, like eyes were always just out of sight. One afternoon, Marissa pulled Ethan aside after a workshop. You've got a real talent, she said, her eyes kind but serious. There's a writing contest in Portland next month. Winner gets a scholarship to a creative writing program. You should enter. Ethan's heart leaped, but doubt crept in. I don't know if I'm good enough, he admitted. Marissa smiled. You won't know until you try. You've got a story to tell, Ethan. The world needs to hear it. He spent that night working on a story for the contest, pouring his heart into every word. It was about a boy who lost his home but found a family in unexpected places. A story that felt like his own, but bigger. When he showed it to Liam the next morning, Liam read it in silence, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he looked up, his eyes shining. This is incredible, he said. You have to submit it. Ethan blushed, the praise warming him. You think. I know, Liam said, his voice firm. You're going places, Ethan. Don't let anyone, not Dale, not this town, stop you. The words stayed with Ethan, fueling him through the next week. He submitted the story, his hands shaking as he hit send. For the first time, he let himself dream of a future beyond Willow Creek. A future where he could be himself unapologetically. But dreams were fragile, and Willow Creek had a way of breaking them. One night, as Ethan and Liam walked home from the community center, a car slowed beside them. It was Dale's truck, and this time he wasn't alone. The two men from before were with him, and their eyes were cold, calculating. "Get in the car, Ethan," Dale said, his voice low and dangerous. "We're done playing games." Liam stepped forward, his hand on Ethan's arm. "He's not going anywhere," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. One of the men laughed, a cruel sound. "You think you're a hero, Cadet? You don't know what you're messing with." Ethan's heart pounded, but Liam didn't flinch. "Walk away," Liam said, his voice like steel, "or I call for backup." The men exchanged glances, then backed off, but not before Dale leaned out the window. "You can't hide forever, Ethan," he said, his words dripping with menace. The truck sped off, leaving Ethan and Liam standing in the dark, their breaths visible in the cold air. "We need to get you out of here," Liam said, his voice urgent. "Somewhere safe." Ethan nodded, but his mind was racing. He didn't want to run, not anymore. He wanted to fight, for himself, for Liam, for the life they were building. But he didn't know how. The encounter with Dale shook Ethan, but it also lit a fire in him. He was done being afraid. That night, he and Liam sat at the kitchen table, a map of Oregon spread out between them. "Portland's your best bet," Liam said, circling the city with a pen. "It's big enough to start over, and there's resources. Housing, jobs, community centers for people like us." "People like us?" Ethan repeated, the words warming him. He looked at Liam, his heart pounding. "What about you? You're just gonna stay here, chasing cases?" Liam hesitated, his pen stilling. "I don't know," he admitted. "I want to help people, but this town, it's not always the place for that. Not for me." Ethan took a deep breath, the words he'd been holding back spilling out. "Come with me, to Portland. We could figure it out together." Liam's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and something else. "Hope, maybe." "You serious?" "Yeah," Ethan said, his voice steady. "You said we're a team. I don't want to do this without you." The silence that followed was electric, charged with everything they hadn't said. Liam reached across the table, his hand covering Ethan's. "Okay," he said softly. "Let's do it." The decision felt like a promise, fragile but real. They spent the next week planning, pooling their savings and researching apartments in Portland. Ethan's tutoring gigs and Liam's cadet paycheck weren't much, but together, they could make it work. Ethan kept writing, his stories growing bolder, more honest. Liam kept digging into his case, despite the warnings from his sergeant, determined to find answers. But Dale wasn't done. One evening, as Ethan locked up the community center, he heard footsteps behind him. Before he could turn, a hand grabbed his arm, spinning him around. It was one of Dale's men, his face inches from Ethan's. "Your stepdad's got a message," the man hissed. "Stop hiding, or things get worse." Ethan's fear turned to anger. He yanked his arm free, his voice steady. "Tell him I'm not hiding anymore." The man sneered but backed off, disappearing into the shadows. Ethan's hands shook as he called Liam, who was at the station. "Stay there," Liam said, his voice tight. "I'm coming." When Liam arrived, he was furious, his protective instincts in overdrive. "We're reporting this," he said, pulling out his phone. Dale's crossed a line. Ethan hesitated. Reporting Dale could escalate things, but running wasn't an option anymore. He nodded, and they went to the station together. The sergeant, a gruff man named Torres, listened with a skeptical frown but promised to look into it. Liam's jaw was tight as they left, his frustration clear. "They won't do enough," he muttered, "but I'll make sure you're safe." The next day, Ethan got a call from Marissa. His story had won the Portland Writing Contest. The scholarship would cover a year of classes, a chance to turn his passion into a future. He told Liam that night, expecting excitement, but Liam's smile was bittersweet. "You're gonna do big things," he said, his voice thick. "I always knew it." Ethan reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining. "We're gonna do big things," he corrected. "Together." Liam's eyes softened, and this time he didn't pull away. He leaned in, and their lips met in a kiss that felt like a beginning, not an end. It was soft, tentative, but it carried the weight of everything they'd been through: fear, hope, trust. When they pulled apart, Liam rested his forehead against Ethan's. "Family," he whispered, the word a vow. A month later, they moved to Portland. The city was loud, vibrant, a world away from Willow Creek's suffocating quiet. They found a tiny apartment in a quirky neighborhood, its walls already filling with Ethan's notebooks and Liam's case files. Ethan started his writing program, his stories finding a home in local journals. Liam transferred to a precinct in the city, where he could chase his detective dreams without hiding who he was. Dale's threats faded, his power diminished by distance and time. Ethan's mother sent a letter one day, apologizing again and asking to reconnect. Ethan wasn't ready to forgive, but he kept the letter, a reminder that healing was possible, even if it took time. In Portland, Ethan and Liam built a life, not perfect, but theirs. They fought, laughed, and loved, their bond stronger for the battles they'd faced. Ethan's stories began to reach people, sparking conversations about acceptance and resilience. Liam's determination cracked open his missing person case, bringing closure to a family who'd lost hope. One evening, as they sat on their balcony overlooking the city lights, Ethan turned to Liam. "You saved me, you know, that night when I had nothing." Liam shook his head, his hand finding Ethan's. "We saved each other," he said. "That's what family does." And in that moment, under the vast Oregon sky, Ethan knew he'd found a home. Not in a place, but in a person, in a love that refused to break. They were more than survivors. They were builders of something new, something true.